One more person coming in, and we've got a couple who have logged in the online setting. So we'll jump in just a second to get started. But it's not a super lengthy presentation today, but it'll be a chance to show and kind of hear some background work on what's gone into this. Part of what is hopefully of value today is we're going to touch a little bit on how the referendum operates. And I'd love for folks to ask me questions about that as a whole before we even talk about while we're talking about the project and the possibility of it happening, as well as what $3.9 million, should that pass, gets you and what it doesn't. My name is Joe Wickland. I'm the Community Engagement and Communications Director for the City of Hermantown. We've got outside partners, well, kind of like outside and inside partners who've helped with this. Trent is our, works with Northland Consulting Engineer. David Bolf is our city engineer and not able to be here today. So Trent will kind of cover the engineering piece, and Luke Seidow from SAS and Associates will dive into some of the landscape architecture and some of the logic that's gone into kind of where we're at right now. In terms of the Fichtner Park project as a whole, you could say that some great work has gone in, and you'll get to see that today. We've worked with some of our peers in various levels of baseball and some community members from not only just baseball groups and other ones on what could be possible should the referendum pass. So in some ways, this isn't a starting point, but also if you're seeing some of this information and you've got a great idea or some questions or some passionate thoughts about other ways the park could be utilized, this is still also kind of a starting point too for that. So don't feel like, oh my gosh, the ship has already sailed and decisions have already been made. But at the same time, some really good work has gone in to being able to show you what we'll show you today. For folks who don't know, when we talk about Fichtner Park as a whole, it is not just one baseball field. It is not only just baseball and softball and those sports that happen at the park. So we've got this image up on the screen right now that'll kind of cover that there's a lot more that happens out there in terms of just gathering space, skate park, basketball, playground equipment and stuff. So it truly is, in a lot of ways, Hermantown's Central Park. I don't think you'd run into a lot of folks, both on city staff side or users of the park, who feel like it is the Central Park that maybe our community deserves or should have. And that's part of where the referendum and the opportunity to fund something different with sales tax comes into play. But do keep in mind that we have a variety of different users groups who use this, but I think a lot of folks initially think about baseball, obviously, because that's the predominant piece that happens at Fichtner Park. Two pieces up on the screen that I want to talk to you about. Again, we'll save all the Q&A a little bit for the end. We've got a couple pauses built in here, but first I want to talk about the referendum as a whole to maybe answer some questions about that. So this November, there will be 3 questions on the ballot, and put a tiny pin in that for a second because there was some efforts made to determine whether it would be 3 questions or 1 question that I can dive into later. But at this point, we do know that there will be 3 questions on the ballot relating to the 3 components of the Community Recreation Initiative: Fichtner Park and its reimagining, the ability to complete our trail system across the community, and then a second indoor sheet of ice for our hockey program and community needs. $3.9 million is flagged for Fichtner Park. And we'll tell you again a little bit about what that opportunities that creates and opportunities to do different things in our park. And of course, it doesn't take long to spend $3.9 million and leave some things out that you can't. There was a lot of work done after the fact, because the starting point of this entire process to be able to put those questions on the ballot was actually 2018, which feels like not only a lifetime ago, but like a totally different universe than the one we live in today. And that's pre-pandemic. All the changes that have gone into people's lives around work, around the cost of materials, around inflation, around the importance of, some people say, how can you possibly even be thinking about something like a park at this time? And other people have said, oh my gosh, the pandemic has showed us that there's nothing more important than outdoor quality gathering spaces. So all kinds of different opinions on how those have impacted us. As part of that, we worked with legislators to have some variation built in on our 2018 proposal through the special session. Some of that included the idea that we would be able to take the 3 questions that were originally approved and form it into one, because we've always looked at the initiative as a whole, as one project that impacts community recreation, health and wellness as a whole. That was not able to be moved forward because there wasn't a special session that was in part of the omnibus tax bill. There was another piece in the omnibus tax bill that added 10% to each one of those numbers, 3.9, and the other numbers for the trails and for the hockey arena. That did not move forward because, again, there was not a special session and there was not a tax or spending bill passed. And then the last piece is there was $4 million in bonding requested that was probably built in only if that 10% piece didn't happen. And that would have been more specific for the hockey arena that also, again, didn't get off the ground. It didn't even get into any kind of bill that Senator Bach had worked on in case the other pieces didn't happen. None of that happened, obviously, because there was no special session. So if you've heard kind of different pieces on how the referendum has the possibility of operating, there's still gonna be a special session tomorrow. We could get an email that says everybody's in business, but at least for the purposes of where we're at today, we're gonna operate with what we know, which is 3 questions and 3.9 million specifically for Fichtner Park. It is also important to note that whether 1, 2, or 3 of these pass, the sales tax increase will only be 0.5% regardless. So let's say it's just the Fichtner Park project that passes. Hermantown will have 0.5, 0.5% increase on their sales tax. Let's say 2 of them pass, the trails and the Fichtner Park. It's still only 0.5% increase. If all 3 go, it's still only 0.5% increase. Part of my job over the next many months, it's already happened and it'll ramp up quite a bit after Labor Day, is to educate folks so that they're in the best position to make the choices that they want to make on the ballot. And one of the things that I know is most concerning for me is I will still not be able to reach every interested voter on this project to help them understand that you could fill in 3 bubbles and it's still only 0.5% sales tax increase. 2 bubbles, 1 bubble. The increase is either going to be 0 because none of these projects pass, or 0.5% because 1, 2, or 3 in any combination will pass. So it's not 1.5 if 3 happen, it's 0.5 regardless. The monies are certainly different, the timeframes are certainly different, but the tax that folks would experience, whether they were at Menards or whether they were making a purchase that was sales tax eligible in Hermantown, will be the same, whether it's 1, 2, or 3. A bit of that is the beginning of my education and the work that I'll be doing with folks. A bit of that is to also recruit you to help tell that exact same story, whether there's 1, 2, or 3 projects you're passionate about, just to be able to have folks be able to make the clearest decision, because it will look like 3 questions and there's certain wording pieces that have to be there. So, but no matter how those pass, 0.5%. Important considerations in regards to Fichtner Park as it is as a whole. There's certainly access and ADA issues in terms of the design. There's bathroom issues. If anybody has been a part of spring baseball and high school baseball and softball in our area, that's an uphill battle with weather as it is. It's also in some ways literally an uphill battle at Fichtner Park because Field 1, which hosts our high school teams in Hermantown, is the lowest point. So it is the wettest part for the longest part in Fichtner Park. So there's been many years where the Hawks baseball team has played 0 to 5 home games at all in their current design. The other amenities, not just baseball, but the sport court, the basketball, the skate park, are also aging. We have certain abilities through our park dedication fees and the things that we do when new developments come to town and things like that to be able to maintain and make some improvements going forward in Fichtner Park and Stebner Park and Keene Creek and Rose Road and all the different parks that we maintain. But certainly there's not ever going to be a point where $3.9 million of park dedication fees are available to do some of the things that are on the plate here as part of the local option sales tax. The work that Luke has done, Trent has done, our engineers and our designers help create, phased in master plan approaches should, the Fichtner Park piece not pass or any of the pieces pass. So we'll continue to still try and make our parks, as great as they can be. But there won't ever really be a situation where $3.9 million worth of any kind of funding is likely to show up and make the impact that this can at that time. At that point, I'll turn it over to, I think Trent's going to start. And you've got a picture both for folks who are in the online setting. There's, again, some handouts that you'll see here talking about some of the preliminary work and what's possible for about 3.9 million in terms of the Fichtner Park improvements.
Hello, everyone. Maybe I got to get a little bit closer here. So Luke and I have been spending quite a bit of time. We've taken a lot of your input over the last couple months and kind of starting to gauge how we initially tackle this and looking at it more from a master planning standpoint. And like Joe said, we have a lot of aging infrastructure, things that are deteriorating, like the basketball court gets used quite often. So does the skate park, things that are really starting to fall apart out there. And those are some of the amenities. And again, a lot of you know that this is primarily a baseball use facility. So trying to replace the infrastructure that we have that's getting damaged, and then also maintain everything that we already have and currently use. So what we've done in this iteration, trying to make this look a little bit more like a baseball and softball field complex, something that would be used for Little League also. And trying to get these 4-quadrant type fields is really what we're trying to go for. So what we've done here is with field 1, that's the one we're really having the issue with. That's the primary high school field. And as Joe said, it's really low. It gets wet and it stays wet for a good portion of the spring. Well, the best solution to that is to raise the grade all around it, bringing in 2-3 feet of fill and providing some type of a turf field, something that'll provide a longer use, not just in the spring, but in the fall too. You'll be able to use it quite a bit longer. And what we've also done is we've reorientated it. So it's kind of a little bit more back into what we would call a fourplex of these baseball fields. And so it is facing a different direction. But I think that's going to be a good alternative and something that's really going to drastically improve for both the community, anybody that wants to use it. It's going to be multi-use. You're going to be able to have baseball, softball. I mean, even soccer, things like that can play on this field. So the other fields that we have, the number 2, that one will shift a little bit. That's the one that's to the northwest. That's kind of shaded in that really light green. So it'll shift a little bit further west. We'll come in there, we'll re-turf it, redo the infields, redo the fencing for it, new dugouts, new bleachers. It'll stay pretty much at its similar dimensions to allow for both softball or Little League. And then the other 2 existing fields that are out there, they'll kind of primarily they'll just stay the same as they are right now. Just because that's kind of where our budgets are landing. We're just not able to meet the expectations of completely replacing those. And the T-ball, we know too from previous discussions, is quite a big user, and there are a lot of people that are around those T-ball games every week. So we've really provided a pretty big update for that one too. So you'll have some type of a smaller abbreviated dugout, smaller field, and we'd have fence around the whole thing rather than just the 2 wings of fence that you have now. So with the basketball court, skate park, so that's kind of right in the middle of everything right now. And we're looking at putting it north of that existing west parking lot. Mostly because it's more of an independent use from what the fields are. We think it's just in a better place over there. So it's more independent. People don't have to park in the parking lot and come into the baseball complex to be able to use those. And then the other thing that we needed to replace is the playground. So the playground will be rebuilt, re-improved, and placed kind of in the center there. So from a parking standpoint, we're not planning on doing anything with the western parking lot at this time. We're just going to leave it as it is. Again, the budget just doesn't offer for it right now. But we will look at redoing that eastern parking lot, which is it's gravel and just not in good shape right now. So we'll be replacing that. And I think we're looking at about somewhere between 50 and 60 stalls. So it'll be a little bit more efficient at parking people than a normal gravel parking lot would be. So then other engineering things, we'll just have our typical stormwater management type practices kind of built in around. So Luke, I don't know if you'd like to just maybe run through some of the other site amenities that you've that we have shown on here.
Thanks. Trent pretty much hit everything on the head. Just want to make sure we emphasize some things that are more park-like within the ball complex as well. Now we have a common core. We have for 3 of the fields, but we also have a press box, new dugouts, fencing, landscaping, a shade structure, and a modified or improved playground. And on both the north end, there's 2 different batter cages, and on the south side, there's 2 batter cages as well. Those are the green squares on the north and south side. The playground we chose to leave in the center core because a lot of the youth activities, when a family's in playing baseball, it gives the kids other things to do. When people have multiple kids, it's pretty nice to be able to see that. So we chose not to isolate that component from the ball fields like we did for the basketball and the skate park, which are typically done by some of the older kids and can be more standalone, to avoid those user conflicts. One of the things that you see most in this is that all of it is the center core. That gray area, that center core, is the area it's going to be accessible, improvements for handicap, and higher in elevation, which will allow the water to go to where it's typically supposed to go onto a ball field rather than onto the ball field itself. So in this case, we're putting stormwater in the southeast and the southwest corner and running that water around to back up to the north to Rocky Run. And on the north end, you see a trail system that connects the existing pavilion to the sport courts and back into the center of the core of the baseball complex. And you see a stub of that trail system, which moves to the north. It gives us an opportunity to, when and if budget permits, that we tie into a new bridge and then expand the future abilities for the north portions of the site. We know it's a bigger complex. We wish there were, the $6 million to do it all once, but the 3.9 million is a pretty good start towards getting the fields up dry and having a lot more use throughout the year.
A little bit background to tie it back to the beginning and the parts that allowed us to be able to ask for local option sales tax that the state legislature was most key and excited about was, one, that this wasn't a single-use park, even though it was a primary use park, baseball being the primary user, but that it did have those other amenities and allowed itself to be a family-oriented park, and that made replacing and reimagining where basketball, skate park, the playground could be was a pretty critical component in this. Compliment to folks in baseball that we work closely with is that they seem to prioritize those non-baseball pieces as high as we had to, so that we're really accommodating, understanding that not only did baseball families who are here for baseball benefit from the playground, but also have some great opportunities to be able to pull folks unrelated to baseball into a true central park. Parking is always a discussion, like Trent mentioned. One of the big changes that might get lost, but is important in this, is that there are 54, give or take, new stalls that will allow that gravel parking spot over at Old City Hall and the Historical Society to be reconfigured in a way that's both a lot more usable and a little less Wild West when folks are parking out there now and using that space as well. Again, the piece, and we can talk more about this in Q&A and bounce ideas and thoughts off of us. But the idea is that 3.9 million to be able to do this or anything that looks like this gets unlocked should that question on the November ballot get 50% plus one person to approve it. So the choice for this to happen really truly does belong to the community, as opposed to, even your city council or city staff or the folks on the design side. It'll really be the community that decides if they want this or not. Any questions or thoughts about this, the referendum, the design, the park, the use, anything that anyone is wondering about. I'm going to start. I've muted everybody in the online community so we can start with the folks in City Hall. And to make it more accessible for the folks who are online, if you could come up, I think I've got the microphone turned on you, just to ask your question so that everybody could hear it. Otherwise, we've got a small enough group, I can probably repeat it. And then if you're in the online setting, we've got a handful of folks, hit that hand raise button if there's something that you're interested in asking about in this particular project, or if it doesn't get answered in the questions that come from inside City Hall first. Jason.
Is there any chance that tennis courts could be added to this plan?
So it's interesting, the questions about like tennis and pickleball were less of a factor at the beginning when we started this with the legislature, because, hey, there wasn't, a tennis piece to this park as it was. I think pickleball, in 2018 is like it's on full-blown rocket ship in the amount of folks who do it compared to where it was then. So probably what makes the most sense is we have a second design, and there's no hesitation in showing it to you, but I want to be clear that the piece that we've walked through already is what is able to be accomplished at this moment using $3.9 million. And the above and beyond of that is kind of adding to a park that we weren't able to. Does that make sense, Jason? So, but we did have enough through this process to know, hey, we've got to know what a second phase or next steps would look like and start to be creative about that. So I guess I'll kind of call that piece up, and Trent and Luke can kind of come back online and talk about it. A lot of what you'll see on the screen right now is there'll be a few key parts I'll walk through, and then I'll let Trent and Luke walk through them more exactly. But the changes that you'll be able to see is, I guess you can imagine this being everyone's dreams come true version. And there's probably versions in the middle, Jason, of these two. But you'll see that there are 2 prime fields on the baseball side of things, and that the turfed multi-use field kicks over to field 3, and a kind of a vastly improved grass field exists still in that flipped format on field 1. And then at the top of this picture, you can see, kind of like Luke alluded to, future expansion, whether that future expansion is now or in the future, depending on this project, where it creates a lot more opportunity on the old football field. Trent and Luke, do you guys want to add to kind of walk us through this version?
Yeah, I think, the fourplex is a lot more developed in this scenario, rather than just having the 3 fields that are meant for softball, little league. We have 2 there that are primarily used for that. The other 2 can also be used, but this also provides a second full-size baseball field. So it lends the opportunity, you can have both JV and varsity baseball teams playing at the same time within the same complex. So we won't have issues with travel or trying to coordinate times. So I think that portion is a lot more well-developed, and I think everybody in this room can probably agree that this is, a lot more preferable. But at this time, it's above and beyond that 3.9, like Joe said, and we'll have to look at other sources. So the other big piece of this is that northern football field. Really, right now, it doesn't get a lot of use today, and this would be a great way to make use of it by adding tennis courts. The pickleball is taking off. We can move some of these other amenities too, like the basketball and the skate park can go up there as well. It gives us room to expand if we find that those uses are being used more than we thought they would. We can expand it. And then we can provide some type of a nice pavilion up there, and again, kind of separate this use from the baseball use and have an area that's more community of all ages, and the baseball field system being a little bit separate. So.
And in this situation, we still prioritize the T-ball down in the southeast side of the court, or the park right adjacent to the parking lot. So it's easier for grandparents and parents to get to that. But this is a much more developed, like Trent was mentioning, it's a much more developed plan, and more, but it's still a very unified park with the connector between the north portion and the southern portion. And then One other thing that we didn't really talk about was the existing parking on the south side, right off of Maple Grove. Just leaving 16-car parking cars there because it's already paved. That's just cheap, affordable, I should say. So we're looking at that as maybe in a handicap parking and have that central or close to the center core.
And with these additional amenities, should this, be explored, you've got in the upper left-hand corner of this particular picture, then that parking lot can be expanded from the amount of cars it has now to another handful to get that to a 121 versus where it's at today, or some amenities put in there in terms of views. And then if you kick up to what would be the old football field or a chance to do some more dynamic court pieces up there, it'd be another 42-ish cars and parking up there, obviously to accommodate what would be happening up there. We've gotten feedback from the tennis and pickleball community that obviously those courts can be multi-court. And so when we see this picture and you see 1 and 3, don't interpret it as being 1 and 3, interpret it as being dedicated space. And like Trent mentioned, that box that's open on the far right side of this is already built in to expand further. Numbers on this are give or take 6.3. No, I feel like I'm off. 5.3. Yeah. So an additional 1.2 to 1.3 million to go to this level. But again, what part of our discussion today was to be both clear on what's possible, but clear on what is on the table in regards to the local option sales tax. So the difference between the two, for folks at home, I'll page back through them and I'll use the two close-up pictures, but the 3.9 piece, turfs, field 1 flips it. And there was a lot of discussion about that. And a lot of it hinged on accessibility for multi-fields, foul balls ending up on Maple Grove Road, Nuggstad Road being a lot more frequent and dangerous than home runs, as well as being able to upgrade field 2 and T-ball, and then still being able to maintain the key other components that are outside of baseball. Like you said, the playground, the sport court, the skate park, although those two find a very different home than they do today. Versus the larger scale piece, as I'll kind of click between the two up close pictures, that kind of revamps pretty significantly 2 baseball fields. Still flips field 1, but keeps it natural turf. Makes field 3 the multi-use turfed, the AstroTurf, for lack of a better term, the turf field. Still is able to redo field 2, but really kind of dials in this as a baseball complex and then pushes the sport courts, the basketball court, the skate park up onto the old football field, and then opens up the opportunity to explore what community tennis, pickleball, those types of pieces would look like. But again, that's out of the range of 3.9. So that's kind of the two differences.
Will we be looking at private funding to help cover the balance?
So Jason's question is, will we be looking at private funding to help cover the balance? And Jason and I have known each other since we were both in college. So he's not going to feel bad that I reword his question for him. If it were possible to expand into the larger park, the more desirable park it would take funding on the private side. The only rewording I'm saying is that a plan at this exact moment? Yeah, there's certainly discussions about that and certainly actions being taken, but at this moment, is there enough for us to say that's the park we're attempting to make? Not at this moment, but also it's not November. And this is in some ways, like I mentioned at the beginning, a beginning part of a discussion for some folks and a starting point, and for others, hey, there's a lot of pieces of work that have already been done. So it'll be interesting. The important part, if you're passionate about or invested in those particular areas that aren't able to be included at the 3.9 budget, I would tell you the best advice, Jason, is to connect with me on the communications and community engagement side, because that will help us shape what is possible. Obviously, again, we look at the community recreation initiative as one project, trails, Fichtner Park, the additional arena. And so there may be interest in being able to do private funding that goes across 3 projects. But all of these pieces, again, are for lack of a better, these are, city projects. So any private funding, we don't want Jason Young to go out and try and raise that money. We want to work with you on ideas on how that could work, because inevitably that's something that the city will have to carry the ball across the finish line on. Make sense? And that was gentle on the rewording of the question so that I made everybody clear that we're not doing the big one yet today. Other questions or things that people are wondering about? I will tell you, we had one online question, why the switch on field one? And I can tell you that flipping that, right now home plate is tucked in the corner of Maple Grove and Uggstead Road. And in essence, this would turn the field, so center field is there. And there were kind of a couple of prevailing pieces on that. One was the idea that accessibility piece for folks, who might not be as able as you are to be able to see a baseball game there without having to be a long ways away from bathroom facilities, concessions facilities, and that. Right now, there's kind of two pieces for concessions for that. And obviously, when we raise that field, everything's going to change there. And does it make sense to rebuild a second press box, a second bathroom, a second set just to serve one field? That's probably not the best use of limited dollars. And the other piece was, of course, the idea that, foul balls are more frequent than home runs, except maybe when I was pitching, Jason. And the idea is, if you've been, I've played on Fichtner Field or coached at Fichtner Field since it was almost felt like a brand new field. And the fact that we've played so many baseball games there without any incidents on Uggstead Road and Maple Grove is really astonishing. And this will at least change the calculus of where most baseballs end up. So there's less kids, parents, and players, having to cross that street to fetch a foul ball. Only home runs. And so that was the driving point. There'll be different views, different angles. The sun will be in different spots, but again, those are surmountable cons in that process. And it felt like this was a better fit in terms of flipping that field.
What's the time from start of construction to completion? Many years, 1 year?
So the question, in case folks online couldn't hear it, is what is the time for construction to completion of construction? I would firmly smile in your direction and say, well, it starts with, I'd somewhat jokingly, but somewhat realistically say it starts with 50% plus one in November. But let's assume this part of the recreation initiative passes. I'll turn it over to Luke and Trent in a second, but the overwhelming priority in this is certainly to get it done as soon as possible, but also to get it done in a way that causes the least amount of impact to park users while it happens. What way can we build this park in a way that doesn't take a whole summer and a whole baseball season out of the mix? And I think we'd be in a spot where overall we'd work closely with our user groups to make that happen. Can we do construction in quadrants so folks move around or stuff? But to answer your question more directly, in a world where we just flat out did it, shovel in the ground to done, I'll let Trent and Luke kind of talk about how projects like this can play out.
So we've already kind of been talking back and forth with some of the other user groups too. And with the timing of when this, the games would end in the fall, we're thinking that we could do a lot of our soil corrections, kind of build up the site, do some of that work in the fall before winter, let it settle over the winter, and then pick it up right away in the spring and mow through and hopefully get all of it done in the summer. So I think that's more than doable if we can take care of a lot of our soil corrections that first fall. So our goal is to not let it extend into 2 full construction seasons. Yep.
Sandy. So Sandy's question is a good one. It's the allocation of the tax dollars, which I am totally not going to rattle off the top of my head. But 3.9 million for this, 11 something, 10 something for the arena, 4.5 for the trails, both in those neighborhoods. Is there a logic in how we got to those numbers? And the answer is yes. They're not equal numbers in terms of 3.9 and 4.5 and 10.89 not being the exact same numbers. But in 2018, when we started, it was the idea of what can be done at the lowest possible amount of sales tax but the maximum amount of impact across a variety of projects. Obviously, there are going to be communities that are looking at a very similar time frame and similar projects starting now that will have the advantage of doing that all post-pandemic, post-price changes, post-inflation. We didn't have that advantage being on the front end, but that's where those numbers came from. There was a great deal of, I don't want to say like horse trading or understand, but like what is possible to make Fichtner Park, the project we're talking about today, as palatable and world-class, and those are two big things on a very different spectrum, as it can be with putting the least amount of sales tax burden on folks. That number is, through all of our work and efforts and working with other communities to find out, was 3.9 million. Let's pretend we're in the trails version of this meeting and that same question gets asked to be the same answer. We feel like, based on the work we did in 2018 and into 19, 4.5 gets us our trail system and is able to lessen that sales tax burden. Certainly building an arena is more expensive than the trails and the parks. So that's obviously why that number stands out to folks quite a bit. All three numbers are lower than we wish they could be. That was part of why we worked with Senator Bach and others to be able to build in kind of that inflationary / cost change bump that we hoped and still hope could happen in a special session, but are not holding our breaths on. And then the bonding piece that I mentioned that some folks are in the know about was a very separate piece of legislation that was targeted specifically for the types of things that can happen at a hockey arena in terms of economic impact in a northern Minnesota community that aren't as possible with trails and are certainly diminished at a baseball complex in our neck of the woods. So that's kind of the work we did to land those numbers. Most we can get, least amount of sales tax impact, most amount of impact on the individual projects that, again, we're viewing as one whole project. The way the law is designed, there can't be like monies bouncing back and forth between these, whether it was one question or three questions, that's still going to be the case, because part of what we had to do to be able to get this approved, to be able to be on the ballot, to be able to be decided by community members, was to be pretty exact about the monies we were working with and where they were going. Do we wish we had more on every project? Absolutely. And I think some of that harkens back to Jason's question, whether we're talking about arenas, whether we're talking about trails or segments, whether we're talking about, picnic tables along trails, or we're talking about turf or different things at a park. There is obviously additional levers that can be pulled along funding, but it won't come out of sales tax. And obviously there's a concerted effort both from residents, from elected officials, from city staff to not have it impact any other taxes in town, and it won't do that. So it would be private funding on some of these pieces. And then for folks in the know, we've been able to start our trail projects through grant funding, and we continue to try and explore grant funding for that. That's a longer, more arduous road, but those exist for certain aspects of the trails project, and probably there's grant funding for certain aspects of the park project. But again, those are here and there, competing with other communities, less certain. This type of funding is there should the residents of our community decide they want it in November. Mm-hmm. So Sandy's question is, based on all of those moving things that have already moved since 2018, much less 2022, will 3.9 get us this? I feel like basic plan is like wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful option A. I'll turn it over to Luke and Trent to talk about how they determined what price point fits 3.9 based on the projections they're doing.
Yeah, so like Joe was saying with some of the other projects and how money gets allocated. So we do that same thing internally. We go back and we look at, Luke's done a couple pickleball courts, tennis courts recently. I've done a football stadium recently, and see how much those are costing compared to what we're looking at here. And naturally, just being in northern Minnesota, we deal with a little bit of inflation. And so some of the prices and the cost estimates we've done already. We've already inflated those numbers a little bit, and then we've also added on another 5% in contingency just in case we run into things that are unknown while we're building. So we feel pretty comfortable with where we're at right now, and obviously hope not to hit any roadblocks that cause issues. So yeah.
Now, with the exception, Sandy, and this is both related to this project and other, how we approach everything in terms of projects at City Hall, but barring the unforeseen, we feel pretty confident that this can be delivered for 3.9. Yeah, go ahead.
Reorient that field operating.
So the question is, and I'll kind of page through the slides to make sure I've got it. So we're looking at, we'll call it option 1 right now, and you can see where T-ball is located in relationship to field 3, I think that's called. And you can see obviously in this configuration, field 3 becomes a lot larger and T-ball gets kicked down in the corner. And your question is, if we do this option, does that mean that this is off the table? The short answer is, obviously anytime we do this type of planning, we want to be able to be far out into the future. And so funding wise, if there was the opportunity to move the T-ball field, which is a smaller piece, we could always do that. But I do think this version that you're looking at right now is really an incredible final version. And less because of T-ball and more because you have 2 of the larger fields. I think if it wasn't possible to do kind of this version, the much more expensive, larger version, I think that you would see the turf ending up where field 1 is now, and the thoughts about field 3 over the long term would be totally different. Maybe that's a larger, but not a larger natural turf field. Something like that down the road, because certainly based on cost, the turf part will only be laid down once. And so that's kind of that flip that would mean that. It doesn't preclude a larger field down the road being on field 3 because of where T-ball is, but the turf part really dictates that once. Would you guys, does that kind of fit with what you're thinking?
Yeah, and I mean, anytime we're working through some types of these master planning phases where we're doing kind of a first phase that's more generalized and we want to do a further build out in the future, you always kind of end up with these things that end up being sacrificial as you're moving forward, which is unfortunate, but that's the reality is, it's not going to deter us from being able to add on to this. But it's something that we'll just have to look at relocating. And yeah, if that situation does come up, we'll probably end up looking at it a lot differently than we would right now in these preliminary phases.
And with that being said, as part of this being a preliminary phase, again, we're looking at option 1 right now. These guys are the experts on this, but moving the T-ball field to the option 2 location at this point would certainly have some cost that hasn't been considered, but it's something that we could take a look at. Does that still fit with 3.9 million so that field 3 doesn't get touched at this point, but T-ball's down by that new parking lot? Possibly. And we'll take a look at that. But at least at this point, we just haven't yet.
And I guess my other question is, you were saying that with master plans, there's always adjustments in costs. Usually it's adjustments in costs or construction costs. Is there something else that would be changing how this would go?
So Jerry's question for the folks online is there outside of labor construction, the costs that you'd expect to kind of vary, and traditionally in the upward direction? In regards to construction, is there a soil piece? Is there a somewhat known unknown that could change the shape of this project? And I'll leave it up to you guys to answer that on the engineering side.
Yeah, and that's typically underground where we usually see those issues. Luckily, this has been used as a park for quite a long time. We know what it's got for foundations there. That's what we really run into a lot regionally, is running into foundations that are unknown, utilities that are unknown. Bedrock, but I feel pretty comfortable that since we're building it all up, we shouldn't get into any of that. But if there's any type of peat material or buried topsoil down there that can't support what we're building, that's the type of stuff that would be an unknown that we have built something into the price already to take care of soil corrections. But if it gets more expansive than that, then that's where we run into issues.
An example of that, Jerry, that I can think of in terms of like real life in a Hermantown process. So if anybody has, a lot of folks have experienced the Boulder Trail coming out of Fichtner Park down to the Engwalls property, but there's a second piece that we were able to build in recent years that goes from Morris Thomas Road into Keene Creek. And we had a pretty good idea that that was a sloppy project to make it work, but it was wetter, muddier, and more challenging soil than even expected. We were still able to make that happen without great burden to any taxpayers or any pieces like that. But did we encounter an unknown that created some challenges? Totally. But was it within the scope that still makes it possible to deliver, for example, that project, close to budget, this project on budget, and those types of things? Yeah. So again, if there was something under the soil that was completely unexpected, that would be the only thing.
No, they haven't been done yet. They're part of our, they're in our budget to do that. So it's just a soft cost that we have a retainer for at this point in time. So as we move forward, if this does get approved, that's when we would do that. So it would be sometime next year.
And the question for folks online was, have soil borings been done to this point? They haven't yet. Any other questions here in council chambers? I'm going to unmute our folks in the, or at least give them the chance to unmute. If any of our folks online want to, jump in, you can just ask a question. If you're one of the online folks, you're all available to do it. Otherwise, again, if there's any in council chambers questions, please just fire away. And while folks are kind of thinking about that, I'll give you kind of a lay of the land of the work that extends beyond a specific project to the referendum as a whole. Again, the work that we'll do at City Hall is entirely educational about it, and you'll start to see more materials about that come Labor Day with the start of school, when folks are a little bit more engaged and it's a little bit closer to the election on the types of things that sales tax does and doesn't do, the types of places you encounter that. We're close to wrapping up a study that will determine the amount of sales tax with a pretty high degree of accuracy, that how much of it actually gets paid by Hermantown residents versus other residents, so that folks will hopefully have access to a lot of really good information when they make their decisions in November. And so some of that's ongoing, but you won't see kind of a deluge of that information until kind of after Labor Day as we get closer to it. Any other final questions as we wrap up? Sandy? Yeah. Yeah. So Sandy's question is, hey, as we think about, the quad kind of setup where all the home plates are closer together, what's kind of built in to protect those folks from foul balls, whether they're kids at the playground or parents at the concession stand piece?
Yeah, so once we get into the design phase, we'll look at how we want to do that. We'll talk with user groups. That's obviously our goal, is to make that a part of the project to protect all the pedestrians. And, we typically either have a backstop that's chain link fence with a hood on it, or a lot of school districts recently have been going towards, a netting material. So it actually stands a lot taller than a wire mesh fence would. And it's, it looks good. You can see through it a lot better. You don't go cross-eyed looking through it, watching the batters. It's something that's where everybody's kind of going these days. So, but we are looking at that. That would be something that would be included to keep everybody safe within the complex. And I think what it finally ends up being is just something that we'll look at during user groups when we get there.
In addition to that, we are showing a shade structure over the playground in part. That's in part of the foul balls. And the way the playground sits in this plan, you have to hit a home run really to be in the way there. We're back quite a bit.
Yeah. Not a guarantee, Sandy, that foul balls won't find kids, but better than just letting them wing it. Other questions or concerns or thoughts? Again, whether we're talking about the Fichtner project or the referendum as a whole. Yep, go ahead, Jerry. And so folks in the online setting, Jerry's really salient point is whichever direction the project goes, if we're in a world where this passes and we have 3.9 million or whatever, we design a park that allows for future steps to make sense versus having to tear up something that we've already done or something brand new to make it the best possible park. I think to that point, Jerry, I think Luke and Trent have done a great job of thinking ahead on that. Certainly, it's one thing to have these types of plans and another thing to actually be standing here in November with the money to spend. And a little bit to Sandy's point, what will $3.9 million get you today versus tomorrow versus 6 months from now? But I do think as long as we continue to think about the park as a whole and even our other projects, the trail plan as a whole, all of our parks as a whole, how the trails connect them. I hope folks feel really confident that type of mindset is driving it. That if we take one step forward, it creates opportunities to take whatever the second, third, and fourth step might be without having to go backward. Any last pieces before we wrap up? Go ahead.
Yeah, that's definitely always a consideration. If we start to find where we're getting into these fine-tuned estimates where we're running into those issues, then yeah, that's when we start looking at doing things as alternates. And that's
So-
yet to be determined.
Yeah, and so the question, just so that everybody can hear it, is, have we thought about ways of taking, if we think, I'm going to page back to the initial project here, the $3.9 million option, what are the most likely cuttables or the alternates should price be in it? And Trent's answer was, at this point, we haven't lined up what those alternates would be. I know should we pass this, we'll have a better idea what those will be, but also some of that will depend on discussions with the user groups and what folks feel is, for lack of a better term, most not havable at the start. A 2 batting cages versus 1. And again, I'm just shooting from the hip. What types of amenities are in the skate park versus not, depending on how close it is. Those will be the types of things that we would have discussions about a little bit later down the road.
And we wouldn't be losing fields. We wouldn't be losing some of the major amenities. Prime candidates and stuff like this is, do we need all the concrete? Do we need all the bituminous? Those are big costs that we can drive things down with. So
I vaguely remember getting an education from Luke Sydow, PhD, that traditionally his beautiful trees end up on the outside looking in when we come into those parts too.
they're already an ad alternate.
Yeah. So some of that mindset is at the ready should we be in that, but we'd also be in a spot based on the work that we've done on the front end where I don't think we'd be making those choices in a vacuum. I think we'd be making them, discussing them with user groups. And again, some of that might be this or that, or some of might be, let's not do this part now. Let's find a way to get there down the road. And then to Jerry's point, we have a down the road plan. And a little bit of that you've gotten to see today between the two projects. Obviously different amenities when we start talking about the old football field, tennis, pickleball, kind of almost a whole second park north of Rocky Run. But certainly a mindset that is going to be used differently going forward.
More, it looks like there's more like usable land in this. Is there ideas after this already, or is that?
No. Yeah. So Coach Wood's question is, hey, when we focus on the football field portion of this, and again, that's probably our like favorite part of the ideal plan, because it almost, you're getting almost what feels like a second park. In this edition, is there more to be able to be added as their usable land? My answer to that would be yes and yes. So some of that is built in that spare box that you see right there. We'll see how crafty I can get with my cursor. If folks can kind of see where that is, there's obviously the ability for additional tennis, pickleball pieces there, but also the configuration. If we're in a spot where we know that this is a go sooner than later, the configuration of this, we would reach out to, again, yourself, Jason, other users about what's the smartest way to put this together the same way we did with baseball to get the most bang for whatever buck that would look like. Again, obviously a lion's share of the work has gone into what does 3.9 get us, because that's the task in front of us. But if we do think in a master planning approach and in a phased approach, you can kind of see those steps already being taken. Yeah, thank you. Great question. I think this will be like the 4th or 5th time I've offered to let you escape to the next day, and there's always been another question. So any last questions, whether online or here in City Hall? I will hang around. I don't know about Trent and Luke's schedule. I'll hang around for a little bit to answer questions offline if anybody has any questions. I also think I'm going to do a little bit of tabling because I know there's a big event at Fichtner Park on Saturday. But we're also going to take this recording and make it available for folks, so it doesn't have to be place and time specific, and they'll have access to reach out to again, me, Joe Wicklund at City Hall, to be able to toss in their 2 cents. Talk about what's possible between option 1, option 2, or other pieces that, other user groups, other passionate areas in our community that we might not have thought of in this process still have a chance to weigh in. But I do want to thank everybody for coming in, for logging in online, and for being a part of this kind of important step in the Community Recreation Initiative. Thanks, everybody.